Hello world, Christian Truther here, and I've got another interview for you. Here is Tanner, and he has agreed to be interviewed. He does not necessarily agree with me on what the shape of the world is. We are, of course, looking for objective truth, and I would like to encourage everyone to be respectful to each other in the comment section below. Be respectful to us. We're definitely going to be respectful with you. And so before we really get into this, Tanner, you've already indicated to me a couple things about what you do for a living, and I just want to kind of say that we are both not involved in a professional capacity with the space programs or government agencies or anything like that. Would that be an accurate assessment? Okay, so neither one of us are involved in anything professionally in that aspect, but we both have an interest in this. And it's important for me to point out that it was people who were interested in science that have been driving scientific discovery for centuries, even amateurs, and so that's something it's very important to understand and remember when we're going over this sort of thing. Now, would you consider yourself a Christian?
Absolutely. You know, my dad was actually a pastor, and I was kind of a rebellious kid, and I never understood his faith. I faked it, you know, all the way through high school, and as soon as I got to college, you know, the Lord brought me to a point where I just couldn't fake it anymore, and He brought me to that low point, which eventually broke my heart. And I realized that without a Creator, without you know, a purpose for my life, I couldn't fake that purpose. I couldn't make that purpose up for myself. So that's really where, you know, I became a Christian my freshman year of college. And I started asking questions, starting with the Bible. You know, why do I believe this book? It's thousands of years old. Everybody knows stuff. And eventually I got to the point where I put my faith that if there was a creator of this world, that He would speak to His people in story. You know, a story, but that is a recorded history of God speaking to man, and it is inerrant and it is true. That's what I believe. And so, yes, I am a Christian. I do believe in Jesus. He is my Savior. And yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I just wanted to establish that you know, that aspect of it, and I am a Christian as well. Hence, I call myself Christian Truther. So, and really, it all boils down to, I mean, if you agree with me, that it really all boils down to relationship with a creator of the universe who is willing to call us adopted children if we believe in Him. And so that is, it really all boils down to that aspect of it. And it's something that I learn more and more each day, how the Bible talks about, like, for instance, the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not, or you will not is another way of saying it. And for the longest time, I didn't realize that wasn't talking about behavior modification. It's not saying, don't do this, don't do that. Otherwise, it would have said, don't do this, don't do that. It says, you won't do this. Why won't you do it? Well, because of the relationship that you have with this God. It's relationship based, not a rules based. Right. So anyway, that's okay. Soapbox. I'm removing myself from the soapbox. So I want to warn you real quick. You're probably going to get some people calling you a shill or a fake fraud. Okay, because you don't necessarily believe exactly what they believe on this topic.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay, I before we go any further, I wanted to give you that warning. So, as we don't have a moderator, I was talking to you about this beforehand, we don't have a moderator, there's a lot of ways that this could go wrong. We want to model being courteous and respectful to each other, even though we don't necessarily agree on things. So, I thought the best way to do that would be, you've watched the videos, I'm going to focus on the first 10 that I did, the primary videos. You've watched these, and I want to ask you specific questions about what you believe regarding each of those videos, and I'm not going to say anything because I've already said something about it. So I'm just going to I'll ask you the question, and in my first video, I was talking about why there would be a lie, and I went through I couldn't see it through greed, because greed would also be a reason why the lie couldn't continue to exist, because of blackmail, for instance. That it wasn't about land control, because it was the belief that the world was round that kicked off exploration. And also I kind of debunked an outer ring based on what I saw as a completely fallacious, completely smooth external ring for Antarctica, so there wasn't hidden land masses past the ice rim. And then I also, right. And then I also talked about that it wasn't a problem for Christianity. We'll get back to the Christianity in the 10th video, so maybe kind of ignore that one. But then also that it wasn't about mental programming, because it's been kind of self-directed on this discovery angle. It's starting with 2200 BC, or 2200 years ago. In the BC era, you've got people who are making their own like Aristophanes and stuff like that. So what do you say on that? Is there a reason you can think of a lie that I couldn't think of that you could bring up? And I know we're going to come around to the belief angle in a second. So if you were going to say anything on that, maybe just give it to me at the end. But yeah.
Sure. Now, right off the bat, I'm a globe skeptic. I don't really know. And I don't think a lot of people do either. And nobody thinks about it. And that's the one reason why I looked into it. I said, man, I can't answer those questions. So I started doing research. But why would they lie? How could you have the European Space Agency, NASA, all these military groups all collaborating together to deceive the world? It could be money. No. Could it be? I guess greed would be money. You listed a few things. No, it probably couldn't be any of those. I don't know how or why they would, but I think it is possible that there could be a deception that is rooted in evil. And I don't think you can discount that. Whether the flat Earth is a psyop to take down the church, yeah, maybe. Is it the globe? Maybe. But I don't think that's a big argument. I actually think that's more of a straw man argument. Why would they do it? Doesn't really matter. Could they do it? Maybe.
Okay.
That's not a big one for me.
Okay. All right. Well, and so that was, again, I did say that this isn't proof one way or the other. This is just, I'm going through the reasons that I could think of why there would be a lie, and I couldn't come up with one. So in my second one, and again, I ended this video also saying this isn't absolute proof, but in the second video I was talking about can we see satellites, and can we expect that they actually do exist? And I honed in on the International Space Station because it's supposedly the largest structure we've put out there, and it's not too far away that we can catch glimpses of it with a magnification of around 60x.
A buddy of mine, photographer, he's actually taking pictures of it.
Okay.
I believe it exists. It's what it is that I don't necessarily know. So,
okay. Okay, so my argument was that NASA was proclaiming it was going to exist in advance, and then we started to see it only after they said they started to build it, and it started changing shape based on how they said it was going to change shape. So what do you... But you started to say something about that. Go ahead and...
Well, what do I think about it? So satellites, NASA, and I don't know if you read this comment or not, but I commented... most flat earthers or skeptics, they don't necessarily believe anything that the government or the military or NASA, because if it really was a deception, they'd be in on it, right? So what is everything in the sky? Is it planes? Probably not. We've seen pictures of the ISS. Is it a bunch of satellites on balloons? No, that might not necessarily work either. But you have to first trust NASA. There's a lot of science groups. They have satellites, whatever satellites are. All that research taken by those, all the the frames that they take of the slices of the Earth to get the pictures that they put together. Yep. That all comes first through NASA. And so I would argue to tackle satellites, you've really got to trust NASA first. And I don't know if you've started looking into the moon landings or anything, but there's a lot of evidence for the moon landings. Well, I personally don't believe that we went, and I don't trust NASA.
Okay.
So, bottom line with satellites, you have to believe the word of somebody else.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will agree that if you're completely trusting the government, you're kind of fooling yourself because
Well, yeah,
if
it's easy to say you don't trust the government when you're talking about taxes and what they do. Yeah, nobody trusts. Oh, government's out to get me. But as soon as you bring up NASA, it's like, oh no, they couldn't do that. Oh, maybe not.
So I heard one guy say, if the government hasn't lied to you yet this morning, they haven't had their coffee.
Yeah,
So
that's a good one.
okay, so in my third video, I leapt from can we legitimately see satellites in orbit, and then went to okay, what about data we're supposedly receiving? And I pointed to GPS, and I gave an experiment you could run with that indicates where it came from.
Yeah, before we move on from the satellite,
Okay.
Was it your brother that you interviewed?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, great interview. Thank you for doing that.
Okay.
A question I have for you and him. You mentioned, I legitimately don't have enough information to know either way, but when we take pictures from the satellites, the Himawari 8,
Yep.
it's like 22,000 miles away or something like that. In that interview, you said it was you or your brother, you said if you took pictures, it wouldn't actually look the way, because of the way light works, and that it would look different. Why don't we have any of those pictures of the weird looking ones? I understand we need to have composites of the close satellites. If this is the surface of the Earth, we have, we take slices and then we put those together. Real photos,
right?
So we have to splice them together. Why don't we have any of the raw pictures that don't necessarily look real from those satellites? And that's a question I've encouraged you, and we can move on if you like. But. So,
I'll maybe address that towards the end, and then also allow my brother to chime in on that. But that actually does dovetail into this. I started talking about satellite imagery, including the Himawari 8 in my third video. I talked about GPS. I talked about video from dish TV services, not just.
Let's talk about GPS specifically.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you brought up some good points. GPS works. I lived in New Zealand actually for a while.
Okay.
Southern hemisphere.
Right.
And it works, right? And they started, I think it was before the 60s, they had radio towers, and that was, you could triangulate locations, but you mentioned that wouldn't work. There's something like, was it Saddam Hussein? Is that right? We were able to locate him through satellites.
Well, we were using for the Persian Gulf War, we were using the GPS to go off road, which the Iraqi military was basically bound to on road. Right. And because we could go off road in the middle of the night, no landmarks or anything like that, we could hunt at night. We could do it. It was really unfair for the Iraqis, but especially with our ability to go anywhere and know exactly where we were,
especially over the oceans. Where there's not radio towers. And I think at the end of the arms race, that really funded us to launch the 24 satellites that kicked off the first global positioning system network. And it was first for military. Mm-hmm. All the Air Force, the U.S. Air.
Oh no.
With NASA, and then it was available to the public. A few years later, Reagan was the first to introduce the GPS system to the public, and then in 2000, Bill Clinton, there's like an HD version of GPS. I don't remember all the names, I don't have all the info, but he was the one that released the final thing in 2000. Now with that goes back to my first point. You gotta believe first that, let's say hypothetically, there was a way to keep those satellites up there in orbit, whether it's planes or some type of advanced thing. You have to believe that they would be honest with all that information. You could do the same thing with planes. The location, because it's way above the surface of the Earth. If I think you can't just trust everything that comes from the military and NASA. That's bottom line. If you're a skeptic, then you're just not going to believe that. So you can't use that as an argument to validate your point that GPS proves the globe.
Okay. And then what about satellite television?
I think it's the same thing.
Okay. Even though that's commercial.
Well, yeah, but who puts it all up there? And I could be wrong. Maybe there are private companies. The first private company that I really heard about, because I'm young, maybe there's more, but SpaceX, which is now run by NASA as well. And there's an Indian division. They just started up. There's China. There's Japan. I understand that it's far-fetched, but at the same time, I don't know either way. I'm just a citizen, so.
Okay.
If that is the proof you need in order to get to the end goal, to prove the globe, I think that's, I think there should be way easier proofs for that.
Okay.
But let's keep going on a different point.
Sure. So in my fourth video, I talked about gravity versus a density and buoyancy only solution, and I closed it off with a video of a bowling ball and a feather in a vacuum falling at the same rate. So there's nothing to go above or below each individual item, saying that busted a density, buoyancy only argument. What do you think about that?
What would I say to that? All right, now this is a fun one. Okay, so to get to the root of gravity and what it is, and it's driven people crazy for years, right? There's a lot of people that proposed what it could be. Michelson and Morley, have you heard of that experiment? They were trying to prove rotation, the ether. It drove Einstein crazy because they couldn't detect any movement. And what Einstein did, he decided everything was relative, right? And so time could actually go backwards and stuff. The problem with gravity, and I believe there is a downward force, obviously. I mean, this works, right?
Right.
Got it. But I don't think there's proof, and I'm going to get to the Cavendish experiment. I don't think there's proof that masses attract, because, or at least in the way that we think it does.
Right.
Because we don't have consistent experiments. And if you say, the only way the solar system would work is if we have gravity, yeah, that's a model that absolutely works. The math all checks out. But if your only experiment is the Cavendish, your Foucault pendulum, GPS, there's a few problems, or excuse me, not GPS, gyroscopes, that's what I'm looking for. Gyroscopes, if you're in a plane, let's say this is the Earth, right? I'm going to do the little model thing. Let's say this is the Earth. Your plane is going around this way. If you are on a ball, you'd have to keep doing a left turn around, right? You'd have to keep turning the plane. With a gyroscope, if gravity acts the way it does, because those gyroscopes are in a vacuum chamber, that's what keeps them going. Every single, I think it's 15 minutes, every single hour you'd see a 15-degree tilt because you're going over the curvature of the Earth. So gravity, for me, you have to assume that masses attract, and I would argue the Cavendish is not a legitimate experiment because it doesn't have an independent and dependent variable. You have to assume R in all your equations, and that is just an assumption. That's a religious belief that you're getting from science. It's interesting, and I don't understand it. And I don't think anybody that says they understand it just plainly, I really don't believe they do. And I've got lists and lists, all the Cavendish experiments that seem to work out. Sometimes they're using metal, sometimes they're using lead. I'm going to do it myself. And there was what's his name? Andrew Bennett. He's a science teacher, and he tried to build it. Just because of funding and stuff, he wasn't able to do it. He couldn't get the result he wanted. He did a smaller version. There's lots of people doing this, and I'm excited to see the conclusions. Because if we can prove gravity works, then we'll have to revisit it. But I just don't think there's dependable evidence to prove big G.
Okay.
So, that's long-winded, but that's
Well, when you said just as a clarification question, when you said we have to assume R, are you talking about the radius of the Earth when you say assume R?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to
To make the heliocentric model work, you have to assume R.
Okay. So I wanted to make sure that we understood that everyone understood what you meant when you said that. When you say assume R, you're talking about the radius of the Earth. in the calculations. Okay, so then we started getting to a bit more physical evidence. In my 5th video, I showed both a video that I took as well as a video someone else took that seems to show water curving over right and things being obscured over distance. So what do you think about that?
What would I think about that? So, good for you for actually having video, because a lot of people, they just take the closest thing online. It's like, see, look, it's curved. I have seen so much footage of, there's a weather balloon 120,000 feet in the air. It's completely flat. I see other people that believe in the globe, same distance, but now we got a fisheye lens and it's super bent, or even the curve of a window, and you look at different parts. There was tons of videos going around. It's so funny what this movement has done. There's so many videos. High school students prove globe Earth. They start like this from the ground. It's like, man, how can you believe that's curved? Okay, now, perspective. Let's get to this, because you did a great experiment. And can you just tell me how that experiment was set up again? You were on a cruise ship?
We were on a cruise ship. We were on the 8th. We were on the 8th floor of the passenger deck. There was 2 decks below for the crew. So, by estimation, and you can look at it in the video, it appears to be around 100 feet. The platform was, you can, back when they were actually going, I checked recently, the route of the ship has changed. They no longer hit the Florida port like they did when we took it. So now that cruise ship just continues out. But when you check the route, it was probably in between 5 and 7 miles away. But then I also calculated, you can calculate the distance based on if you know the sensor size you have and know how many pixels the structure is taking up of the sensor. You can then do a calculation on what the size of the object, and if you also know the size of the object, how far away the object is. And so in that video I explained that. But so I basically said, we can see the platform, we can see thin supports, we can't see the structure at the bottom despite my elevation, and it seems to be cutting off about 10 to 15 feet of the structure where you can't see the objects go into the water.
Okay, so now, not a physicist, I don't know much about this, but I think perspective and the barrier of oxygen, air, water molecules in the air can actually explain a lot of that. Okay, so this is my incredible artist rendition. Can you see that?
Okay.
Okay, so here's your boat, frying pan tower. Perspective works like when you're looking down a hallway, it gets smaller, right? So this angle right here continues, or this angle, everything above it is visible, right? Everything below it is disappeared. In this, everything's getting smaller when it gets further away. We can agree on that, right?
Okay.
Right. Now you have a barrier. What does a lens do? What does water do to images? If you put a pencil in water, what does it do? It magnifies.
Okay.
So now, and I don't know. I know that there's the debate on whether 8 inches per mile squared is a legitimate measurement of the. You called it bulge, not curve. What should be hidden, right?
Right.
Would you agree with 8 inches per mile squared?
8 inches per mile squared is the amount of drop, but it does not describe the bulge.
Okay. Cool. So
can I grab something real quick? Just
sorry, go ahead.
Just explain that to anyone who may not have seen that video. What that's talking about is to measure the drop. If I'm here and my object is here, the drop will be straight out and then straight down. But the bulge would be if you took and cut this ball across this distance. That height would be the bulge that's actually obscuring view versus the drop, which would be much greater than what the bulge would be as far as altitude is concerned. All right.
So, my kind of what I disagree with the conclusion of that video specifically, and good demonstration by the way, is you're not accounting for magnification of the object, and also I think that distance needs to be calculated, and we should be able to see consistently that that bulge happening, losing objects. But I've seen so much, and again, it's all just a bunch of information on the internet. How do I know it is true or false? You know, I see a bunch of stuff both ways. I've seen, I don't know if you're familiar with Rob Skiba. He did the Lake Michigan thing, where he started from one side of Lake Michigan and looked at Chicago skyline on the other. That's a popular one to look at.
Yep. Well, I've done that myself. At Warren Dunes, you can do that when you get up the Warren Dune. I can see it on a clear day.
You know, a friend in Seattle that did the same thing. 8 inches, well, whatever the measurement is, you can see 100 miles away. You shouldn't be able to see that far. So for me, that's enough to say, why do people just ignore that? That drives me crazy. There's got to be something going on. Yeah. So I don't know if that's, you know, that might be, if there was, I'm going to have to do some experiments myself to see how reliable that is, because on a clear day where humidity is low, there's not a big lens happening in front of you to make that object seem larger. That's not a winner for me. That's not a winner either way.
Okay.
Just because I've seen so much from both sides.
Okay. So in my 6th video, I discussed southern air travel from I'm forgetting the name. It's Santiago, Sao Paulo, Johannesburg to Sydney, Sydney to Santiago.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
And
So, you know, again, with the information on both sides, I've actually done it myself and seen, you know, you can go to the flight tracker thing, and I don't know how reliable that is, but I think it's weird that, first of all, it just means, maybe it's just really lucky that everything's in the northern hemisphere and that's most efficient, what you use to make most money, and so that's why we don't travel in the south. But it blows my mind that there's not a huge industry to fly in the southern hemisphere. There was actually a circumnavigation of the Earth's website. It was really expensive to get on, but they were going to be the first to fly around the world this way instead of, you know, this way. From the North Pole to the South Pole, go all the way. That flight was actually canceled. And if you go to the website, it is weird because it happened when I was watching it. I could reserve a ticket. I think it was like $1,800 and you could be a part of it. They had like a masseuse. They had on board really nice dining. That thing got canceled. And it's like, well, that's not very helpful. Another thing, why is it, this goes back to the Richard Byrd, Admiral Byrd, did a lot of discovering of Antarctica. He said, I guess there was a lot more land. There's a lot of unexplored things. Why is there this treaty in place? The one treaty that has stood for 60 plus years by every single government in the world. You know, for conspiracy theorists, they can bite onto that real quick. It's like, oh no, aliens, reptile people. But I think it's a little bit weird. There's not a lot of... I think it's weird. And I think that, you know, supports skepticism of Antarctica and the flight paths. So...
What I just said was, I hope not reptile people in that kind of cold. Cold-blooded, that doesn't work so well.
I know there is just a lot of weird stuff in Antarctica. You have like the weird pyramids. You have, if you go on Google Earth, that's the one place they have a big blocked out area where they don't have that on any, like the North Pole doesn't have it. That's all mapped and everything. There's just a lot of security, and there are virtually no flights that go over it, and not a lot of flights go in the south, and some of them drop off apparently. So,
yeah, the drop off is going to be. I did have someone say that, just to clarify that one. That's just transponder data. It gets when you exit an airport's space where there's no longer radio contact. They can't see your transponder anymore. That happens in the northern hemisphere too, across the Pacific. Right. But yeah, that's just transponder data. But as far as anyway, that's just
another thing to add on to that. I think there are a lot of answers that don't necessarily get acknowledged. You know, we talked about the ether, Einstein, Michelson, Morley. Einstein didn't believe in it.
Michelson, Morley.
There you go, Michelson, Morley. They believed in an ether, and they think that affected the air currents. If you know, flight times, there's a huge air current. And if you look at the AE map, the at the muzzle projection,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's a circle, and that would make sense for flights. And actually, you could get planes that fly a lot faster. And the only big planes that do that trip are the ones that are capable of going that fast. And everything is on autopilot now. I mean, your friend, what was the pilot's friend?
His name is Mark. He's my father-in-law.
Okay. Oh, well, it was cool.
I started with family because I knew them. So.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And this is my first interview ever, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, he said, I don't know if he fully understood the argument that was being presented to him, but he said he's flown all the way around the world, and of course you could do that. And I know you know that you could do that if it was the AE projector. So yeah, let's clear up southern flights, because yeah.
Okay. The next video that I did then was on sun movement, and my principal argument was that if the sun is going in a rotation around a flat Earth, that when I see the sunrise, when I see the sunset, assuming it's traveling at the same speed, and here in Michigan, during the summer solstice around June 21st, 22nd, 23rd, in that space there, depending on the year, the sun is visible for almost 16 hours. So basically 2/3 of the day, and that I would have to be seeing, of course with the circle, I'd have to be seeing 2/3 of that pie. It would look like it was rising significantly farther north and setting significantly further north than it appears to do in the wintertime.
Right. Okay, so yeah, so the 24-hour day in Antarctica would not be possible, right? It'd just be a sliver of the pie going around. There's actually plenty of globe skeptic, flat earthers, whatever you want to call them. They're doing those tests right now. They've actually got a lot of crowdfunding to actually record the sun different parts of the year and compare them. Because one thing you would not have is the 24-hour sun in Antarctica. Now, some people, they just make up this imaginary sun. It's like, oh, yeah, but that could still work if you had a second sun. We don't see a second sun. That's ridiculous. Right. But what people have noticed, it's like there's only a few 24-hour sun videos that have come out, and they just don't look real. And people think that they've recreated Scott Base in the north in order to do the 24-hour sun. I don't know what I believe about that, but it absolutely wouldn't work on flat earth. I'll be finishing this.
Yeah, we'll try and hurry this one along then. Star movement. I point out that it appears that there is polar movement of the stars in the southern hemisphere.
Right. Oh, yeah. So we're moving 1,000 miles an hour, right? This is us. We're moving around the sun. All right. And the sun is doing its own thing. It's fun. So we're doing all this. And, of course, I understand that there is parallax, right? They must be incredibly far away, right? It expands this universe. It's so huge that we can't comprehend it. So we don't see, maybe the North Star moves a little bit. Now we have a new North Star, and we see that. What I don't understand is if we're moving around, how do we have the same stars in summer and winter, and it doesn't change if we're on the other side of the sun? That doesn't make any sense to me. Because the sun, so this is the sun, this is the earth. We have this that we're looking at, right? And we see it, and we don't. And we see it, and we don't. And we see it, and we don't. And slowly, remember, pretend it's a cylinder, right? If we're in a cylinder, we're on this side of the cylinder, and we have these stars that we're looking at. Daytime is over here when we're facing the sun. The stars should be different over here.
Okay.
So that doesn't make sense to me. I literally don't understand.
Okay.
So also southern and northern hemisphere, some have said like it's little, like we have our own perspectives, right? Because naturally we can only see so far. So we have our own personal little dome of vision that we could do. So yeah, I just don't know with the stars. Okay.
All right. And so I recommend looking into summer and winter constellations on that topic. My ninth video, I did a couple things where I talked about the bulbs. We've already talked about that, so I don't have to go there. I did I did another real quick hit on the density, buoyancy versus gravity argument, where I showed that density, buoyancy didn't have a mathematical reason to drop. If you just have density, it doesn't provide a motion speed.
Let me
Yeah, go ahead.
so
You have a point on that then. Okay.
density and buoyancy can't prove direction, right? You have to have a specific direction. I believe that God talks about direction all the time. Above, below. I think He's implemented gravity. Just like He could create gravity in the heliocentric model, why couldn't He just have drop?
Okay.
I believe in that.
Okay.
I believe in a direction. So, and I think density and buoyancy, like, that makes sense.
Okay.
It's denser to the air, so it falls. So there you
go. Okay. And then I talked about, at the very end of the video, I talked about how you had different guys who were working on different elements of a grand equation for orbital paths, and each one was independently obtaining a number that didn't have anything to do with what this. So you had one guy who had the central equation. He says, well, this works for what I'm seeing as far as orbit paths, but I don't know the distance, and therefore I don't know the speed, and I don't know what's causing it to circle this way. Then you have over here Newton's going, well, there's this drop rate that I found over here for this constant based on mass. And then over here you've got a guy that says, well, we're about this far away from the sun, and when you plugged those two numbers into this guy's equation, it works.
Right.
So what do you think about independent science coming together to form something greater than any of them knew?
I think math absolutely works, but that doesn't mean the model is correct.
Okay.
So yeah, you can if we know the distance, the way we actually measure the distance from Earth, other places is parallax. We're on one side, we actually we have a distance from one side, and then we spin to another. So we're actually measuring. I don't know what was first measured, but in order to get a distance to a planet, you can't just get your ruler out and measure it, right? So we actually use parallax. That just assumes and backs up the heliocentric model. And then you base everything else off of that assumption that you're in that model. And so all the math absolutely checks out. That doesn't mean it's reality.
Okay. All right. And then my final video was the first 10, which if you've made it this far, I highly recommend. You can check out, if you haven't seen all of these, you can check out in the description below. I've got all these video links.
Yeah.
But the 10th one was about the Bible. Does the Bible actually say that that the world is flat? Is this in somehow are my views on the world being round somehow in direct disagreement with the Bible? I didn't think so. What do you think?
Well, and you have to decide. Well, any interpretation of the Bible, there's a billion different doctrines, theologies based on interpretation. So, of course, that's your own personal interpretation. I would say I don't see a lot of scriptures that say it's a ball. And I think, there's a lot that, like Job described it as a tent, where the grasshopper's in a tent. There's a lot of metaphor. There's a lot of simile. There's a lot of poetry. But there's not a lot of poetry that reflects it being a globe. So if I were a globe Earth believer, man, I would stay away from the Bible. Because I don't think it says, if you really think that, there's not a lot of support for that in the Bible, I'd argue.
Okay.
And I think you have to take everything the Bible has metaphor. So.
Well,
yeah.
definitely, something that's as a personal challenge. I would be really interested in someone who can point to me something that they see in the Bible as that the section doesn't appear metaphorical to start with, and then
Sure.
isn't directly contradicting something else said in the same book. So that would be.
And real quick, what do you believe about the creation count?
Mm-hmm.
What do you believe? Is it a 6-day literal? Do you think it's like 1,000 years? And if you believe in that, how do you make that work with, first of all, the firmament. That's something a lot of flat earthers believe in.
Right, which I did cover.
Also, the Earth being created before the sun. You know, plants before the sun. There's a lot of different things. Is it all metaphor, or is it how God made it?
Yes, I believe that the Bible, when the Bible says that God created the world, He did it in phases that would probably be closest described to as days. Whether or not it was exactly 24 hours, I'm not going to say that if it was 24 hours and 2 seconds, I'm not going to go that far, but I'm going to say its closest approximation as far as the time frame. And it would make sense if he did it in days, as it does call it in days, and it doesn't really have a problem with that. I will also say that he was creating things with apparent age. That's going to really mess up any timelines that's someone's going to try and throw out there, because he didn't talk about he created seeds. He talked about he created vegetation. He didn't talk about he created eggs. He talked about he created birds. He didn't talk about he created an embryo. He created man. And so these things are things with apparent age. I'd apply that to the. But again, this was something I talked about to somebody in the comment section that actually someone who I was going to interview, but who kind of fell out on this. But he basically he was very hung up on cosmological chronology, but I had to remind him that that's not the same thing as the heliocentric model, because the heliocentric model, we've been talking about the Earth being round since 2,300 years ago. Closer to 2,300, but the cosmological timelines they've only been around for about a century, so it's the two very different things, and really we're talking about the shape of the world.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a tough one, and that's why, you know, when anybody dismisses. And this goes for all doctrines. You know, I'm actually jumping into dispensationalism, pre-trib, post-trib, all those arguments. You know, I'm a new husband. I want to seek truth. We're taught to test all things, and as a Christian, I believe in that. And so that's why I don't really trust anyone. I trust the Bible. I pray for knowledge, and science makes sense. You know, if God made the world, He made science. You know, and I don't think any research in that, with you know, not just believing everything we hear, even if it's like, man, how could they fake this? Maybe, you know, maybe Satan is the king of this world, and he could do that. And maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. But I think everybody needs to investigate for themselves and not put down other people who have, you know, who are looking into it for themselves.
Okay. And that is something. Yes, we should test all things, especially it talks about the spirit.
That doesn't mean I should. You know, I haven't been completely smashed out of my mind with alcohol. I should really test that and see if that really is bad. That's
right.
Not
with wisdom. Yes, but I guess ultimately, I feel like we're living more and more in a post-truth culture, where we are willing to say things, well, that's not my reality. And that is actually kind of what bothers me the most. So that's...
Let me stop you real quick.
Sure, go ahead.
Absolute truth versus relative truth. Man, those are huge things that are just completely taken for granted. There's an absolute truth to this world.
Oh, man.
And God implemented that.
I believe you just said you believe there's an absolute truth to this world, and God implemented that. You kind of froze for a second there, but yeah, I understand you have to go, and I really appreciate your time. This went a little bit longer than I was intending it to, but I appreciate it, and we'll keep the conversation alive, and we definitely will be looking for absolute truth about something that there is an absolute truth about.
There is, and so, I trust that, you know. You've said in your comments, I am not lying to you on your video constantly. I am not lying to you. Right. I'm not lying to you either. I believe that you have an honest heart, but I believe that I can be deceived and you can be deceived. And thank you so much for at least taking the time. So many people just brush off this subject because it's funny. And I mean, yeah, it's a little silly. I think it's kind of fun. And I get excited about asking questions and trying to see what is really true. So thank you for letting me, be on your show, the Kevin Klein Show, and and good luck. I'm excited to see your upcoming content.
You too, and we'll see if and maybe this leads to something, and people have further questions, and we can address them from there. So appreciate it. Thank you so much, Tanner. You have a good day.
You too.